The sky was heavy with clouds, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. In the quiet corners of the world, far from the noise of the modern age, whispers of an ancient prophecy began to stir once more. A prophecy buried in the shadows of time, cloaked in mystery, and written in a language few now understand. It is known as the prophecy of the popes. Attributed to a 12th century Irish archbishop named Malachy, this prophecy is said to outline the identity of every pope, from his time until the end of the world. 112 cryptic phrases, short poetic lemmas written in Latin, each one believed to correspond to a specific pontiff. For centuries, the list remained hidden, only to resurface centuries later in a book published in 1595 by a Benedictine monk. At first glance, the list might seem like nothing more than coincidence, a curious relic of religious imagination. But as the years passed and the papacies unfolded, many began to notice something chilling. The lemmas, though vague, seemed eerily accurate. Descriptions that matched names, heraldic symbols, places of origin, and even personalities. From popes, long forgotten to those whose reigns shaped the destiny of the Church, the prophecy whispered their presence before they came. But why now? Why has the world once again turned its eyes to the forgotten scrolls of Malachy? Because, according to the list, we are living under the reign of the final pope, the last name, the last chapter. In a time of war, plague, unrest, and spiritual confusion, the question rises like incense in the wind. Could this really be the end? Before we dive into names and symbols, into secrets and shadows, we must first understand the man behind the vision. Who was Malachy? What kind of soul receives glimpses of the future? And what force compelled him to write a timeline for the Church that would span nearly 1,000 years? This is where our journey begins. In a time long before ours, in a land veiled by mist and miracle. A land where prophecy was not entertainment, but warning. Where visions were not questioned, but feared. The silence before the storm has passed. The first drop of revelation has fallen. And now we begin to listen. The prophecy of the popes is no longer a distant echo. It is a voice calling through the ages, and it is speaking now. Long before his name was ever linked to prophecy, Malachy was simply a boy named Malmhedhoc o Morgair, born in the ancient Irish city of Armagh in the year 1094. From the very beginning, his life seemed touched by something sacred. Even as a child, he was drawn not to the games of his peers, but to the silence of prayer and the deep wisdom of Scripture. He entered the priesthood young, quickly earning a reputation for his holiness and discipline. But Malachy was more than just a man of ritual. He was a reformer. In a time when the Church in Ireland faced corruption and spiritual decay, he brought light into the shadows. He restored monastic life, re-established discipline, and reawakened the reverence of the sacraments. Wherever he went, revival followed. Yet it was not his administrative genius or his ecclesiastical achievements that would echo through the centuries. It was a vision, a moment of divine interruption that would seal his place in history. The exact circumstances of the vision remain cloaked in legend. Some say it came during a pilgrimage to Rome, others during a deep trance while praying in solitude. But all accounts agree on one thing. Malachy saw a line, a succession, of future popes stretching far beyond his time. And with each figure, he saw a phrase. Short, symbolic, mysterious. These were not names or direct descriptions. They were riddles, keys to identities that would only become clear with time. He recorded them, one by one, with a gravity that suggested he understood the weight of what he had seen. He never spoke publicly about the prophecy. Perhaps he feared misunderstanding. Perhaps he was instructed to remain silent. Whatever the reason, the manuscript vanished from public view and only emerged centuries later, hidden, protected, preserved. Malachy died in 1148 in the arms of his dear friend, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard, a spiritual giant in his own right, wrote of Malachy with deep reverence, calling him a man of miracles, humility, and profound connection to the divine. For many, that would have been the end of the story, a holy man, remembered by saints. But the scroll bearing the 1 to 12 lemmas had a destiny of its own, and once it reappeared, it began to move through the corridors of power, through the halls of the Vatican, and into the hands of those who feared, or hoped, that the final name was drawing near. Malachy's legacy was no longer just about reform. It had become a countdown, a sacred clock, ticking slowly toward a moment the world has yet to understand. The manuscript contained 112 short phrases, each written in Latin. At first glance, they resembled poetic riddles, fragments of meaning that hinted at something deeper. These were not traditional prophecies with clear names or dates. They were cloaked symbols, mysterious identifiers for men who had not yet been born. This was the genius and the enigma of Malachy's vision. Some mottos were easier to connect than others. For example, the 101st motto, Labor Solis, the labor of the sun, is often linked to Pope John Paul II. He was born during a solar eclipse and buried during another. The alignment was uncanny. Others saw deeper symbolism in the tireless work and radiant presence he brought to the papacy, a sun tirelessly laboring. Another striking example is the 109th motto, De Medietate Lunae, or of the half moon, associated with Pope John Paul III. He was born during a half moon, elected during a half moon, and died after just 33 days in office, all under that same lunar phase. The coincidences pile up, and with them, the tension. Are these interpretations forced in hindsight, or is there something truly prophetic at play? Could Malachy have seen not only who these men would be, but the celestial dance that would accompany their lives? The mottos range from geographical clues to personality traits, from heraldic signs to obscure Latin phrases whose meanings still stir debate. For Pope Benedict XV, for example, the motto was Religio Depopulata, religion depopulated. His reign saw the devastating effects of World War I, when countless religious institutions were destroyed and faith itself was tested across Europe. Then came Pope Paul VI, under the motto Flos Florum, or Flower of Flowers. His coat of arms? A fleur-de-lis, the lily, a flower deeply tied to purity and spiritual royalty. One after another, the limas echo through time. Some seem vague, while others strike like thunder, resonating with uncanny clarity. Skeptics argue that these connections are a game of confirmation bias. Believers, on the other hand, see in them a divine fingerprint, subtle yet undeniable. What makes the list even more haunting is not just the past accuracy, but what lies at the end. The final limas carry a darker tone, a sense of culmination. As the list nears its end, the imagery becomes more apocalyptic, more urgent. The names are no longer poetic, they are warnings, and as the final line approaches, the 112th Pope, silence seems to fall between the words. A silence that speaks louder than any motto before it. Whether one believes or doubts, one thing is clear. The prophecy of the popes is not easily dismissed. It invites reflection, evokes awe, and demands a question. Are these cryptic phrases the voice of heaven, quietly guiding us toward the final chapter? The final line of the prophecy does not follow the pattern of the others. While the previous 111 mottos are brief, often only a few words, the 112th entry is different. It is not a motto, but a full description, and it carries with it a weight unlike any that came before. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, Peter the Roman will sit upon the throne, feeding the sheep through many tribulations, and when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. This is not subtle. It is not symbolic. It is a declaration. Many have wondered, who is Peter the Roman? No pope since St. Peter has taken that name, out of reverence or perhaps fear. And yet, the prophecy names him as the final shepherd, the last to lead before the end. Some believe this figure is not a literal pope named Peter, but a symbolic one. Someone who mirrors the role and mission of Peter, the first pope, a spiritual rock in a time of chaos. And this is where Pope Francis enters the conversation. Born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis is the first pontiff from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the first to choose the name Francis, inspired by Saint Francis of Assisi, a figure of humility, reform, and radical compassion. His family roots trace back to Italy, specifically to the region near Rome. Could this be the connection to the title, Peter the Roman? More importantly, Francis has led the Church during unprecedented global challenges: pandemics, wars, ecological crises, and deep divisions within Catholicism itself. His papacy has been marked by a call for mercy, unity, and spiritual renewal, but also by controversy and resistance. Some see him as a reformer sent to prepare the Church for a new age. Others see him as the fulfillment of prophecy, the final pope before the collapse of old structures. Under his reign, the world has watched as ancient institutions waver, traditions are re-examined, and a new spiritual consciousness begins to emerge. Whether one sees this as progress or prophecy fulfilled depends on where the heart stands. There is no official declaration from the Vatican regarding the prophecy of the popes. It is not dogma. It is not even considered legitimate by many within the Church. And yet, the silence around it is part of what makes it so haunting. If this is the last name on the list, what follows? What is meant by the destruction of the city of Seven Hills? Is it literal, symbolic, a collapse of spiritual authority, or the beginning of a purification? These are not easy questions, but they are the ones echoing now, louder than ever, as the world stands at a crossroads of faith, technology, and transformation. The figure of Peter the Roman looms like a shadow across the final page. And still, the prophecy waits, silent, watching, nearing its final breath. In the long and winding history of the Catholic Church, no papacy has stirred such a global reaction as that of Pope Francis. Loved by many, criticized by others, he stands as a paradox. A man of deep humility seated on one of the most powerful thrones in religious history. But beyond the headlines and public appearances, something deeper pulses beneath the surface, a spiritual confrontation unlike any the Church has faced before. From the moment Francis stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in 2013, the tone shifted. He chose not the golden vestments of tradition, but simple white. He bowed before blessing. He refused the papal palace, choosing instead a modest guest house. His message was clear. This would be a different kind of shepherd, yet his simplicity masked a fierce urgency. He spoke boldly of a church in crisis, not only from scandals and division, but from spiritual stagnation. He called for reform, not just of rules, but of hearts. In encyclicals, speeches, and gestures, he challenged the faithful to return to the core of the gospel: mercy, service, and compassion. But his reign has not been without conflict. Traditionalists have accused him of weakening doctrine. Progressives have accused him of not going far enough. And somewhere in the middle stands a world watching, wondering what his true role is in this moment of prophetic tension. Francis has often referenced apocalyptic themes, not as fear-mongering, but as spiritual wake-up calls. He has spoken of the devil as an active force, of a battle for the soul of humanity, of a world drifting dangerously from its creator. Under his leadership, the Vatican has opened dialogue with science, with other faiths, and with the marginalized. He speaks not only to Catholics, but to all of humanity. And in doing so, he seems to echo another great prophecy: the third secret of Fatima, revealed in part in the year 2000. That vision described a bishop dressed in white walking through a ruined city, stepping over bodies before falling to the ground. Some believe this figure is symbolic of a future pope, or even of the suffering church itself. Others wonder if Francis has already stepped into that role, not as a passive victim, but as a guide through collapse. Wars rage, the earth trembles, faith fades in some regions, and rises with fire in others. The church is not crumbling, but it is transforming. And Pope Francis, whether he knows it fully or not, is presiding over that transformation. If he is indeed the final pope, or the last before a great spiritual shift, then we are living in sacred times. Not because the world is ending, but because something old is dying, and something new longs to be born. Through it all, Francis walks slowly, deliberately, a shepherd among wolves, a voice in the wilderness, and perhaps, just perhaps, the last bridge between what was and what will be. When we hear the words "last pope," the instinctive reaction is one of finality, of an ending that carries weight, fear, and perhaps even despair. But in the language of the divine, endings are rarely what they seem. They are thresholds, doorways, veils to be lifted. The prophecy of the popes, in its final lines, seems to speak of destruction, of the city of 7 hills falling, of judgment, of tribulation. But is this truly a prediction of doom? Or is it the symbolic language of purification, of an old world crumbling so that something greater can arise? In the scriptures, fire is often not a force of punishment, but of refining. The storm does not come to destroy the seed, it comes to awaken it. And perhaps this is the true heart of the prophecy, not an apocalypse in the modern sense, but a revelation, an unveiling of what must change within the church and within ourselves. The phrase Peter the Roman may not point to a singular man, but to the return of a spirit, the spirit of the early church, a return to simplicity, to radical love, to leadership that walks barefoot among the people. Perhaps the destruction of the city of 7 hills is not the physical fall of Rome, but the fall of pride, bureaucracy, and spiritual stagnation. Across the world, we are witnessing a great spiritual shift. Old institutions are being questioned. New generations hunger not for empty ritual, but for authentic encounter. The church is no exception. In fact, it may be at the very center of this metamorphosis. Mystics and saints have long spoken of a time when the church would pass through its own passion, a time of betrayal, suffering, and silence, only to rise anew. What if this is that moment? What if the 112th Pope is not the end, but the final note of an overture, the deep breath before resurrection? We are invited, not to fear, but to awaken. The prophecy is not a chain binding us to destiny. It is a mirror. It reflects where we are and calls us to where we must go. The collapse of systems, the chaos of change. These are not signs of abandonment. They are signs of rebirth. Just as Christ's death was not the end of his story, perhaps the final pope is not the end of ours. Perhaps it is the beginning of the church reimagined, reborn. A return to the flame that first lit the hearts of fishermen and outcasts. The message hidden in the final lines of Malachy's vision is not one of despair. It is a whisper, ancient and eternal. Be not afraid, the time is near, but it is not the time of death, it is the time of awakening. There is a silence that comes after the storm. Not the silence of destruction, but the silence of clarity. The clouds begin to part, and in their wake, something ancient stirs within us. The sense that we have touched a mystery far greater than ourselves. The prophecy of the popes is not just a list of names. It is not merely a timeline carved in parchment. It is a mirror held up to the soul of humanity, asking us to look deeper, not only at the papacy, but at our own spiritual journey. From Malachy's sacred vision in the 12th century to the reigns of popes whose lives unfolded like riddles made flesh, the prophecy has walked quietly beside history, speaking in symbols, in shadows, in whispers. Now, as the final name echoes across the modern world, the question is no longer just about who the last pope might be. The question is, who are we becoming? Are we ready to let go of the old wineskins, the rigid forms, the walls we have built around the sacred? Are we ready to return to the living flame, the spirit that moves without permission, that speaks through the humble, the forgotten, the brave? Pope Francis, whether the final pontiff or the one who paves the way, stands as a sign that the church is no longer confined to marble halls and gilded cathedrals. It is in the streets, the prisons, the broken places where Christ still walks. It is in the questions we dare to ask. It is in the love we dare to live. The city of 7 hills may tremble. Institutions may fall. But the kingdom, the one not built by hands, endures. Let the prophecy not be a cause for fear, but a call to vigilance. Let it awaken in us the courage to be light in dark times, to be truth in a world of noise, to be love where there is none. We stand at a threshold, not of despair, but of decision. The final chapter has not yet been written, because it is being written now, by every soul that chooses faith over fear, action over apathy, and hope over silence. May we walk forward not with trembling hearts, but with eyes wide open, because perhaps the true prophecy is this, that in the end, it is not one man who will stand against the storm, but a people, awakened, who will rise in its midst.